Well, I'm just going to get started. Of course, a few folks will trickle in, and that's totally fine. For those of you already in here, similarly, if you get booted for any reason and have to come back in, that's fine. It doesn't disrupt anything. I'll let you back in. My name's Emily Weiler. I'm the program coordinator for the Montana Public Health Training Center. Certainly seen a lot of these names before, so I'm sure you guys have seen my face quite a few times. We're excited to have you for this webinar today with Adam Brewer. Just some reminders, you guys are muted when you come in, so if you're instructed to say anything, just remember to unmute yourself. We love seeing your faces, so keep cameras on if you can, but we understand, especially if bandwidth is low, that you might have to turn them off. I'll be managing the chat box, so if you have a question for Adam and you know anything you want to throw in there, if you have questions for me or any technical difficulties, put them on in there and I'll keep an eye on them. And I think that's about it on my end. I'm going to stop my screen share here. And then Adam, if you want to take it away.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for this professional development training. I think it's commendable that with the amount of time that each of us is spending on Zoom these days, that you would voluntarily join a 4-hour Zoom professional development training at 9 in the morning. So I just commend you for that. And I'm glad to have you and glad to be with you for the next few hours as we talk about ethics. And I think the other commendable thing is the fact that you would come to this training in hopes and learning about how you can be better trustees of public resources and better ethical stewards in your areas. And this, of course, is what this training will focus on. So my name is Dr. Brewer, and I have been teaching at the University of Montana for about 3 years now. And I research and teach our ethics class on campus in the Master of Public Administration program. And I do research in ethics and just really love talking about how we can make things more efficient and effective and more equitable for the people that we serve. And I think that as we discuss today, you'll get a sense of how you personally can make a plan to do that in your own area of expertise. And so let's go ahead and jump right into it. I don't really like to waste time. I like to cruise through it. So let me just share my screen here and we'll get started. Okay. So, so this is my basically training A of my ethics, and I titled this "Exhibiting and Promoting Ethical Decision Making in Public Health." The training, so we'll basically do it in hour increments, just so you know. So after about 55 minutes, we'll have a 5-minute break to give you a chance to refresh, and then come back for each hour. And so that way it's, it doesn't go by slowly for you, and it gives you a chance to kind of recoup after each hour. And the way that I normally do these trainings is I use a praxis model, as you notice here at the bottom. And basically what that means is, we'll start the hour with a little bit of kind of training and discussion about particular points in ethics, aspects of ethics, and then give you a chance to apply your knowledge to practice. And because ultimately, when you simulate the application of your knowledge, that's how you're going to learn. So I use the praxis model in my teaching with students, and I am excited to use it with you today. My main suggestion is to actively take notes and engage with those in attendance. Have a notepad and paper out, or type on your laptop. Don't leave this training without recording the thoughts that you have to better yourself moving forward. And so please take notes, and so that you can make an action plan, after this training. So let's go ahead and start with a thought activity. I think that's a great way to begin. So in your notes, write down one phrase describing what acting ethically looks like in your job. Now, some of you may not know totally what the term ethically means, and that is okay. That's why you're here at this training. So if you're not exactly sure what that means, maybe just write down something that comes to your mind. Take about 30 seconds, and once you're done, why don't you share what you have written down in the chat box. So write down one phrase describing what acting ethically looks like in your job. and then share with us your answer in the chat box. You're all in different areas of work, so I expect that you'll probably have different answers. Oh, good. Okay, I'm seeing them start to pop up now. Okay, so Mike says build conditions that support the health of people, environments, and communities. Good. Right. So you're thinking about ethics from an organizational standpoint. I think that's great, Mike. Don says transparency, respectful of differences. Yeah. So being clear about our actions in government with those that we serve. Victoria says keeping personal data private and treating all cases the same regardless of background. Yeah, so showing a sense of impartiality or being judicious in our decision making and not showing a preference for somebody based upon personal characteristics. Yeah, that is certainly a virtue, an ethical virtue there. Matt says showing honesty, accuracy, and honoring privacy. Good. Yeah, I think those are all important aspects of ethics. Being accurate in our reporting of data is definitely something that we should be doing. Brooke says using morals and integrity to conduct business. Good. Yeah. Operating with a sense of integrity, I think, is an important goal that we all should have. Any others? Those are great answers. Let's see. Is it Shauna? Acting in the best interest. I hope I'm saying your name right. If I'm not, just speak up and say, hey, you're not saying my name right. Acting in the best interest of those that we serve. Yeah, that's operating in the public interest. Sometimes public interest differs from private interest, doesn't it? Sometimes what we think is the right answer, the public may not necessarily see as the right answer. And so we do have to be considerate of what is in the public's best interest. Perhaps sometimes what the public wants isn't in their best interest, maybe. And that's when we confront challenges as public health professionals. This is particularly true with COVID. Any other thoughts? Great. Yeah, well, thanks to all of you. I think those are all great answers, and they certainly capture a certain aspect of ethics that I think we're going to explore even more today. So let's jump back here on my slide presentation here. So I think it's important that we first define ethics, only because ethics is a term that's often used incorrectly. And so the basic definition of ethics is ethics refers to well-based standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of duties, principles, specific virtues, or benefits to society. Also I call them consequences. Now, each of those four items that I've emboldened there, I'm going to talk a little bit more about a little bit later on. But basically, ethics is administrative ethics is well-based standards of right and wrong. So what do I mean by well-based? Well, if you go back to the early 20th century or the late 19th century, when in the United States, when our government, the bureaucracy was beginning to become much larger, their interpretation of ethics or what constituted ethical behavior was much different back then. You saw patronage. President Lincoln, of course, was able to push the 13th Amendment through using patronage and offering patronage jobs to members of the House of Representatives to get their support for the 13th Amendment. And we saw activity like this throughout government. And over time, the standards of right and wrong have changed in the US government and in state and local government correspondingly. And those standards, of course, are much dramatically different today. And so even though ethics evolves, what was considered 100 years ago to be ethical practice has changed 100 years later, and we expect there to be changes in our understanding of ethics 100 years from now. There are concrete lessons or ideas about ethics that we can establish today and understand and apply to our practice in public health. And so that's important to understand. Now, I'm keeping this definition of ethics up here, but it's important that we also distinguish between these three terms that are often used interchangeably and incorrectly. And that, of course, is the term ethical, moral, legal. The term moral is often used probably the most with interchangeably with ethics, and morality really refers to distinctions between right and wrong, or good or evil, and these are generally related to one's personal individual conscience, or religious or social group, or values of a society or a social group that one is related to. And so morals are something that really comes from within, or that's established, via perhaps a religious affiliation or some other affiliation. And so that's where morals kind of differ from ethics, because ethics generally originate from how we perceive the actions of government or government workers and the actions towards their constituency. Legal, on the other hand, is basically deals with what is or is not forbidden by the law. And so what that means is that sometimes these terms, although different, can contrast with one another. Sometimes what is legal we may not see as moral, or something that is ethical may not be legal, right? Here's an example to illustrate this point. This is an example that I'll often use. This is one that hit the news a few years ago. I'm dealing with Kim Davis, the county clerk down in Kentucky, after the Supreme Court decision in Obergefell v. Hodges that made same-sex marriage legal throughout the Union. She ordered her subordinates to stop issuing marriage licenses altogether, and basically in contra to this order from the Supreme Court. Now, there are different ways you can look at this case, and I'm certain among this group there are different opinions about these actions of Kim Davis. But I think really what this case demonstrates is the difference between ethics, morality, and the law. From an ethical lens, employees are faced with the decision to defy Davis's orders or obey them, right? And so, sometimes you're asked to do something in your organization that you don't agree with, and all of a sudden you are presented with an ethical dilemma. Davis, of course, also was faced with an ethical dilemma as well. From a moral lens, Kim Davis made a moral determination regarding same-sex marriage. Others may come to a different moral conclusion based upon their own personal values, obviously. And from a legal lens, Davis's actions violated constitutional law. And so we see here that sometimes our ethics or morals may counter the law, or vice versa. And so I think this case really is illustrative of the differences between these terms, and helping us understand that we can look at something from a moral, ethical, or legal lens and sometimes arrive at a different answer. And that's important to note. So in ethics, we really have 4 dimensions. So I noted this in my ethics definition: the duties, virtues, principles, and consequences. We're going to talk about each one of these in more detail, but I just wanted to give you, some of the basic definitions of these 4 terms. So duties are essentially certain obligations assumed when taking on a role or profession. So each of you, when you have taken on your role in public health, there are certain obligations that have, that you have been given or are assumed in that role, or certain behaviors that you're expected to elicit in occupying that role. Virtues are different than duties. Virtues are various characteristics that define what a good person is. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. Principles are the third component of ethics, and those are fundamental truths that form the basis for behavior. So the principles really is referring to actions, not so much virtues that refer to how you are as a person, but principles are really how those virtues are actually expressed in behaviors and in actions. Consequences are the actions that produce the greatest good for the greatest number, or perhaps don't produce the greatest good for the greatest number. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So these are our four components, and understanding these and how these apply to you, I think will really help you in being able to think about ethics from a, in a more organized way, and to be able to kind of understand how you can think through ethical dilemmas that you're faced with. So often going and talking about each one more in detail, when I think of the term duty, I often think of like my dad. And I grew up in a very duty-based household. We always did things out of a sense of duty. If we went and helped somebody, or if we were doing chores or this or that. And so whenever I think of duty, I often think about my upbringing and how duty was, very much something that was a part of that became part of my own personal ethic, so to speak. So when we think of duty, though, we often think of old-fashioned. I think of like this Uncle Sam poster, for example. Narrowly, duty implies restricted actions one is required to take, meaning that we are duty bound to do certain or not do certain things by external controls. So one question I have for you, and you can unmute your microphone or you can throw it up in the chat box, but what are some things that constrain your actions as public health administrators? Is there anything that constrains your actions as public health administrators? All right, I see a few popping up here. Victoria notes grant requirements. Right. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just write the grant in the way that we wanted to? Good. The regulated public who don't care to be restrained, or maybe you mean unregulated public. Yeah, good. Funding. Yes, funding certainly constrains our actions. There's so much more we could do with more funding. Good. The law, Matt, and that's exactly right, Matt. The law and policies constrain what we can do in our actions. Sometimes there are things that we'd like to do as public health administrators that we think are the right thing to do, but we're constrained by policy. Good. Any others? Awesome. So yeah, sometimes our actions are constrained by the law, by policy, by certain requirements that we have to live up to, and so on. So, an example I like to use is, with my kids. As I note here in this next point, broadly, duty has special importance. At a minimum, my wife and I are constrained by the law to provide a safe environment for our 4 kiddos. If we shirk that duty as parents, then our children could be taken away by the state. In fact, my wife, used to teach parent classes to folks that had their children taken away by the state, and it's an unfortunate occurrence. However, if I think about my duty as a parent only from that lens, thinking about it narrowly, that my actions are restricted. Okay, I can't, I don't want to get my kids taken away, so I'm gonna, try to, give them a safe environment. That's true. That's one way of looking at duty, but certainly duty goes beyond just that, right? We also have a duty to teach our kids how to be good citizens, how to engage socially, how to eat healthy foods, right? those are certainly duties. By not teaching our kids those things, it doesn't mean that our actions will be constrained or that our kids will be taken away. But implicitly, as parents, we do have a duty to teach our kids that. And so thinking about this from, the vantage point of you as public health administrators, you have a duty to go to work every day. That's kind of thinking about duty narrowly, but you also have a duty to serve the public, fulfill expectations, and be trustees of public resources. And so duty, we can think about it narrowly, and that's good. It's good that we, that our actions are constrained sometimes, and that, we think about it that way, but we also need to think about duty more broadly and what duties that we have beyond just the policies and rules that constrain our actions. So expanding upon this, I have a question for you, and you can throw these up in the chat box. But when you think of like qualities of maybe a good person that somebody that you work with maybe, or a good friend, what are some qualities that to you define a good person? You can unmute your microphone or throw them up in the chat box. What are qualities that define a good person? Good, Victoria. Yeah, empathy. That is an important quality. I think that's one that we all wish we had more of. John, it says integrity. Good. Matt says generosity. Yeah, that's a great quality. Honesty. Great hair. I know. That's one I wish I had. Or a good full beard like Matt. That is a good quality right there. I unfortunately don't come from a very hairy family, so it takes a long time to get a good COVID beard. Mike says, someone who acts in the best interest of being a good citizen of the world. Good, yeah. Shauna, someone who does no harm but seeks to act in the best interest of others. Yeah, certainly. And sometimes we do harm without realizing it. We'll talk a little bit in the third hour, a little bit more about that. Good, okay, awesome. Yeah, great answers. I agree with all of those. Let's see, let me bring up my screen here. Yeah, so when we're talking about virtues or the qualities of a good person, here is one virtue list that I've made just on this slide. But in my mind, public servants should display honesty. Some synonyms, but also different words but similar words are integrity, reliability, loyalty. I think being a reliable person, somebody who your employer can rely on to get the work done and do a good job, that is certainly a virtue. Being respectful, civil, courteous, showing decency, being caring, being responsible, showing accountability or self-restraint. This is one that I don't think we often think about in the prism of ethics, but sometimes not being the right person or not being always right all the time, that is an example of a virtue, showing self-restraint. Sometimes maybe you're that person that sits in a meeting and somebody says something that seems outlandish to you and you just can't help but say something about it. Sometimes exercising self-restraint is in fact an ethical virtue. At times maybe we need to be more strategic about when we speak up and share our thoughts, of course. Being fair, following process, showing impartiality. I think one of you mentioned impartiality, showing equity. So there are many virtue lists. In fact, if you've ever read like Aristotle, he gives a whole list of virtues that define the quote unquote good person. So these, of course, vary based upon time and context. But in the 21st century, this list that I've given here, this is a pretty comprehensive list of some expectations that are present for public administrators. So, maybe you display some of these qualities, but there are others that you could work on. So maybe make a special note to yourself, maybe there are a few of these virtues that you personally could improve upon in your work in public health. The next aspect is principles. This, of course, addresses what is the right thing to do. And sometimes the right thing to do is not so clear. Principles are fundamental truths that form the basis of behavior. As a reminder, those types of actions that are right or obligatory. So really, it concerns the right thing to do, or as I say, virtues in action. When I think of principles, I think of, how can I take this virtue of honesty, integrity, self-restraint, and materialize that into, an action. So, following the laws, policies, or regulations is a principle. Treating everyone equally, being fair in your actions. So you can see how these are statements that are virtues, but as actionable items. Do not lie. Follow the golden rule. Basically that, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's I don't know if anyone follows baseball. Growing up, my family was like avid Cubs fans. And my grandfather even said, if you're not a Cubs fan, you're not in the will. And that was kind of a joke growing up. But anyway, there was a famous catcher, Yogi Berra, for the Yankees, who died in 2015. But he once said, always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours. You take a second to think about that. But that's I think right there is very kind of in a comical way illustrative of the golden rule, right? It's an important principle, I think. Protecting confidential information is an actionable item. Avoiding impropriety, share and disclose information to the public that you can legally disclose. And it's one thing to actually, some people would look at, okay, I dumped all this information on our county webpage. There it is for the public to digest. But sometimes that's not actually the most ethical action. If it's pages and pages and pages of documents and data, there's no way that some average Joe is going to come along and be able to digest that data. So sharing and disclosing information to the public also means making it digestible in a way that the public can understand the information and be able to engage in public policy making. That, of course, is an ethical principle. Let's see, I think there was one other thing. Another one, so avoiding impropriety, that of course is important, but even the appearance of impropriety, hiring your buddy for a new position in your organization, even if they are the most qualified, you have to always think about how your actions are perceived from the outside, right? And so it's one thing to avoid unethical actions, but it's another thing to avoid the appearance of unethical actions to the public. And that's something we have to be mindful of. Okay, the fourth component of our ethics definition is consequences. This has to do with what is the most beneficial action to take. And this, of course, is something that we're talking about in our department meetings all the time. What is the most beneficial action to take? So public health administrators should try to obtain the greatest good for the greatest number of people. You've probably heard this before. It's called the utilitarian principle. However, some challenge this principle because some policies, although beneficial to the majority, ignore the minority and may not be the most equitable policies. We'll talk a little, again, in the third hour, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But sometimes the utilitarian principle may mean policies that ignore the minority. And so some challenge the utilitarian principle that we also it must be balanced with equity. You can't ignore the minority when you're making public health decisions. Public health administrators should be committing to producing positive outcomes, right? So what are some of those positive outcomes? Well, in basic terms, improving the welfare of society and perhaps increasing the happiness of individuals. These are certainly consequences from our actions that we hope that we hope to see materialize. And so ethics deals with consequences, how we got to those consequences, and whether or not those outputs from our organization are actually doing the best for people in society. Okay, so going along with consequences means that we have to talk about teleology and deontology. Now, I know these words. I remember learning about these terms really like not so much from an ethical lens, but like in a philosophy class. And so, in my suggestion or my recommendation would be to think about these in terms of consequentialism and categoricalism. That's how I remember these terms instead of these kind of weird words, teleology and deontology. I think both of you, or both of these, you can probably connect with. So both of these philosophies deal with consequences or the outputs of our organization. So if we're approaching, outcomes from the categorical perspective on the right-hand side there, categoricalism basically says that there are universal truths and actions that should be taken based on those truths, regardless of the consequences, right? And so basically categorical reasoning is saying that when we're focusing on organizational output, we need to be focusing on how we got that output, not so much on the output itself. So, so an example of this might be honesty is the best policy, right? No matter what, it's important that we are honest in all of the decisions that we make, even if that means an outcome for our organization that might mean the public is a little bit angry at us, right? The public is unhappy with the outcome, but we were at least honest with the public and told them in a transparent way the information that they needed to know. Now, consequentialism is a little bit different. Consequentialism is more tied with the utilitarian principle. It's really the belief that the moral worth of an action is determined by its consequences. So one way of thinking about categoricalism versus consequentialism is this idea of the ends justify the means. Consequentialism would say the ends justify the means. So no matter what it took to get there, as long as the output is good, ethical, moral, then that is a good outcome. Whereas categoricalism would say the opposite, that if the means to get there were unethical, then the outcome certainly is not, even if it is perceived by a lot of people to be good, maybe the greatest good for the greatest number, it's still not the best outcome. So telling a white lie to achieve a goal is an example of consequentialism. Usually consequentialists use the example of like a murderer comes to your door. I know this is kind of like a little bit morbid to think, but a murderer comes to your door and you can tell, they're holding like a knife or a gun in their hand, and they ask you, is your neighbor home? Or where does Brian live? And Brian happens to be your next door neighbor, right? And Brian is home. Do you tell the murderer that Brian is there at home, or that that's his house? And this, of course, is an ethical dilemma that pits this idea of categoricalism versus consequentialism, because maybe in this example, honesty is not the best policy. The outcome is not going to be a good outcome, right? And so you have to think about, would I lie to the murderer to ensure that my friend Brian isn't murdered? Another example that's a little bit more connected probably with your work in public health is maybe over exaggerating the effects of a disease, only sharing the worst case stories to get the public to vaccinate, right? And this is something that public health officials really have to think about. How do we get the public to have the right amount of fear regarding a pandemic or an illness? We certainly don't want to lie to them. So in this case, is honesty the best policy? But perhaps honesty might mean that the public isn't fearful enough of the implications of a pandemic or a disease. Whereas if we over exaggerate some stories and share, worst case scenario data with the public, then that puts, that's kind of more of a fear tactic, not like some would say, not like an unethical fear tactic, but a tactic to get the public to respond adequately to a pandemic. And so this, of course, is a discussion that's happening in public health that has ties to categoricalism and consequentialism. Are there any questions about that? I know this is kind of getting in the weeds there of ethics, but I think it's important to understand that distinction. Okay, that's fine if there's no questions. If you do have a question, just shout it out. You can just interrupt me, that's fine. Okay, so one other thing, and then we're gonna do a case study. So, basically this idea of duty and virtues and principles and consequences constitute what in the scholarship of ethics we call the ethics triangle, which is basically, as you see here, duty in the public interest is at the center, and then at each point we have virtues, principles, and consequences to guide our thinking in terms of ethics. So let's do some praxis here. So I want to give you a chance to apply this knowledge. We're going to read a quick case. This case is located, Emily sent in a bunch of attachments yesterday in an email. So this is your first hour breakout room case. And so we'll actually read the case together as a class. And then let's see what time, we're doing good on time. So, and then we'll split up as breakout rooms, and you can talk about this case together. So here's our first case. Jane, a small, in terms of growth charts, just turned 3-year-old, is new in Kristen's class. Jane's father brings her to school each day at breakfast time. As required by licensing and the USDA food program, the school serves milk at breakfast and lunch. Like a number of children in the class, Jane refuses milk and drinks water instead. Kristen allows children to make this choice. One day, Jane's father tells Kristen that he and his wife do not want her to allow Jane to drink water until she has drunk at least a full cup of milk. Kristen assures them that she will encourage Jane to drink her milk. At the next meal, Kristen tells Jane that her family wants her to drink milk so she'll be healthy and grow strong. Jane sobs uncontrollably. Kristen comforts her and allows her to drink water. She tells Jane that she will talk to Jane's father about letting her drink water. Jane's eyes grow wide and she sobs even harder, saying, "Don't tell daddy, don't tell daddy." So in your breakout rooms, talk about what personal morals do you have that may influence how you approach this situation. What is Kristen's duty, and to whom is she duty bound? What principles should she apply in making this decision? Would you use consequentialism or categoricalism in your decision making? So you'll spend about, you'll spend how much time here? About 5 minutes. So this will be our first breakout room, and then we'll come back together as a class and talk about this case. So Emily, whenever you're ready, and the rest of you, again, this case, if you want to read it again, since you probably won't see the slides in your breakout room, it's in the attachment first hour breakout room.
Yes, and you should all have a little invite into your breakout rooms. There'll be 3 or 4 of you in there. There they go.
Okay, so it looks like everyone's back. Hope you had at least a good brief discussion about this case. So let's talk about this. This is kind of a simple case, but if any of you have been involved in, my wife, she's a preschool teacher actually, so this is a case that would be of interest to her. And even if you're not doing early childhood and you're like work in public health, I think this case is illustrative of some important points. So let's talk about this first question. What morals, and you can talk about what you discussed in your group, but what morals do you have that may influence how you approach this situation? Would anybody be willing to share?
I just want to say my first concern with this case is how upset the kid is and how adamant she is about not telling her father. That's my first thing of like, is there an issue at home or is she just like extra dramatic?
Okay.
Like, that's a huge red flag.
Okay, good. Other thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, Emily, I had that at first thought as well, but kids can be pretty dramatic if they don't want to do something. Yeah, but that was my like initial first thing that I thought. I'm like, oh, that's, I think that's probably a small percentage compared to the reality that kids can be dramatic if they don't want to do what they don't want to do.
Right. Yeah, anyone with kids knows that kids don't like to, if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it, right? Good. Yeah, thank you, Don. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think with kids, especially young ones, maybe at home they can't control things, but this being one area that they can control, might also factor into that. I saw in my classroom, because I taught early Head Start for a year, that sometimes my kids would refuse milk because it's some one thing that they can control, or how much they want to eat. But by law and requirements for early Head Start and for Head Start, they have to at least try one bite or one sip, and then they can have something else. So that's the way we kind of worked it out.
Right. Yeah, and that's tough. I mean, obviously for young children, it's good for them to have some level of choice in certain environments. That's part of healthy development. And in fact, I was just taking my kids to the doctor's office, and they asked that question on the survey. Does your kid get a chance to make choices? And I have to think to myself, oh gosh, how have I been that parent that's like, no, that's a naysayer all the time. Yeah, it's certainly a consideration to make. So in terms of personal morals, I think as I think about this case, yeah, I might
Adam?
think about like children and how I feel about kiddos, and not forcing them to do something. That's kind of how I look at it. Go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I was just going to say that Michael has a comment in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. In loco parentis and mandated reporter requirements, handle at lowest levels internally, but definitely report to someone in authority internally. Okay. Yeah. So you're talking about like the "don't tell daddy" statements. I presume that's what you're referring to there. Good. So what is Kristen's? Yeah. So this next question, and I think Mike's comment gets this: what is Kristen's duty, and to whom is she duty bound?
I think she has a bit of a duty to both the parents and the child, because she's supposed to be taking care of the child, first and foremost as a child care professional or whatever, but then she also has to take into account what the parents want.
Right. Yeah, in fact, that's a great point, Victoria. In the Montana Professional Educators Code of Ethics, which you're going to look at later today, that code of ethics notes that educators have a duty to both parents and students, right? And so, then that brings us to this question: what happens when the interests of one party that we're duty bound differ from another party that we're duty bound to? And that's a challenge. Other thoughts about Kristen's duty? Thinking about it from the vantage point of what might constrain her actions. There might be policy. Mike notes the caregiver also has a duty to herself to protect her from liability. Yes, well said, Mike. I can agree with that. And so, certainly in this case, the teacher has to be mindful, even though this seems like a basic situation, this educator has to be mindful of the decision that she makes. So in terms of making this decision, let's look at these last two questions. What principles would you apply in making this decision if you were Kristen, and would you use consequentialism or categoricalism in your decision making? And you can report what your group talked about. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you think, but what your group, some points that your group made as well.
I found it interesting what Ashley had to say about that there was policy already where you have the child at least take a sip or something. So at least you can say to the parents, hey, she took a sip. I got her to take a sip of milk. We can work on it, 2 sips tomorrow or 3 sips. I don't think she's going to drink a whole cup of milk first, but she does have to drink and stuff. So it does sound, I like that there is a policy in place. So I guess that would be following the honesty is the best policy, but kind of mixing a little bit of, not really, it's not a white lie. Yeah, honesty is the best policy, but just because you can't do exactly what the parents want doesn't mean that it's bad, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. So good distinction there, Victoria. So you're essentially saying that like by giving her a sip, you've achieved an outcome. The outcome is that you've gotten the student to at least take a drink of the milk, thereby meeting the demands of the parents, and also kind of and sort of the demands of the kid as well. Okay. Interesting. Other thoughts? One thing I might add to what you mentioned there, Victoria, is, if you think about it, you're kind of in a conundrum with this situation because, right, you could do what the child wants and don't tell the dad, right? And you could be basically, meeting those demands of that child, but also you could tell the parents. And I think you have to consider the implications of those choices, right? So Don brought up the problem with the "don't tell daddy" statement. Is that indicative that this child is victim of child abuse? Well, potentially, right? And so, letting this child have water instead of milk and not telling the father, even though that is a lie, the outcome might be a good outcome. And that is the child avoiding being abused, right? For not listening to the teacher, for example. And so, this all of a sudden, what seemingly a minor, kind of basic case is actually a lot more serious when you consider the fact that telling the father could actually, have pretty bad implications. Now, that may not be the case, but that's certainly should be on our mind as a concern. At the same time, by telling, by making, the child, drink the milk, that also can be problematic if, in terms of, that child's relationship with food, and, forcing milk every single day, all the time. That also, is very problematic. And so you can see that the outcomes of one choice versus another aren't so positive, that you could have some outcomes that aren't positive at all. So is there an innovative solution in this case? Is there something that can be done? Ashley mentioned the SIP method. Is there a way to meet the demands of both parties that we're duty bound to as a public servant?
I think it's interesting that in this case, the policy, you can see the importance of policies. Like she can fall back on the policy. Like with this is, we have them try. If they don't, then we're kind of bound to give them something else because they have to have hydration. I mean, you can, use those kind of words. So if there wasn't a policy in place, I think it would be a lot more difficult to figure out what direction to go. And I also think if there is abuse that and I don't know because I've not ever been a teacher, but it seems to me that you might see evidence of that in other areas and be able to make decisions based on that. I kind of struggle with that idea of not telling the father at all or not talking to them or at least trying to cooperate and collaborate with them.
Right.
They have a right to know it's their child. So, but if there's obvious abuse, then clearly I think it's important that you go to the supervisor or whatever, high upper management to then take on that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Don. So there's certainly this case demonstrates the need for policy that can guide our employees in tough situations like this. When you have an absence of policy, then the next best step would be to report the incident internally and try and discuss this issue collectively with others that have expertise in this area. Victoria notes, give the child a small glass of milk, about 1 sip worth, and she'll drink a whole glass of milk before she gets water. Check with the dietitian provider to see if milk is the correct option. Maybe other protein calorie supplements would be better tolerated and effective. Yeah, so those are great ideas. You know, my innovative solution would be just have a little jar of Hershey syrup on hand and squirt some in there and mix it in, and you know, you get her to drink the whole cup of milk, and dad's happy and she's happy. I don't know, that probably, I don't know if that would actually work, but that is you know, one option that would meet the demands of both parties potentially. Other
Like
thoughts
that
on
one.
this? Go ahead,
I
Dawn.
think I've done that one.
Have you? I just think
Once,
about my
like years
kids.
ago, my kids are teenagers, but yeah.
Yeah, like how do I make this food more palatable, right?
Exactly. Chocolate makes everything better.
We always did experiments too, like you put food coloring with milk and you see how like pretty it spreads out into like a circular rainbow on a plate. So when they saw that, they're like, oh my gosh, milk is so cool. So I want to try drinking it now. We're dressing up like a glass of milk and having them all represent parts of like a My Plate too. That really helps kind of illustrate some stuff. So our kids were really more likely to engage in drinking milk and trying new foods based on the My Plate activities. So
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Ashley, for sharing. Good. So I appreciate your comments on this case. And I hope that you're seeing that even like little decisions like this that we're faced with on a daily basis have ethical implications, right? And that we have to consider, to whom are we duty bound? What principles do we employ in making this decision? And what consequences might ensue from this decision that we make? And being mindful of those things. Any other thoughts on this case? Awesome. Okay. Well, gosh, what a great first hour. I really appreciate your comments. Really excited for what's ahead. But what we'll do now, since we're at 10 o'clock now, is we'll take our first 5-minute breaks to go ahead and take 5 minutes to refresh and come on back at 10:05, and we'll continue with our training. Okay. Looks like yeah, it looks like it's 10:05, and we got a few of you back, so thanks for coming back and joining us. It'd be great to see the rest of your faces once you take care of your bedhead, the rest of you. Good, so hopefully you're feeling refreshed. I was just looking at, so I'm located in Missoula, and we had a pretty foggy morning, and the fog just lifted. It's so beautiful outside right now. I do like those kind of fall, kind of wintry days during this time of year. It's really cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on. So, you know, we've had a chance to talk about the basic 4 components of ethics: duties, virtues, principles, and consequences, and thinking about how those apply to a case. Now, there were some great points brought up in this last discussion that I think are, you know, that really connect well with what we're going to continue on talking about. Our 5-minute break. Okay, so in the second hour, let's do a quick thought activity. In your notes, write down at least one thing that you consider to be a minor ethics violation. So something that you might consider to be a minor ethics violation. That could be in your work, that could be just in government work in general. What's something that you consider to be a minor ethics violation? And once you've written that down, please share your thought there in the comment box. Ah, good, Matt. So yeah, hiring a close family member. We call that nepotism. Yeah, and this happens, gosh, it happens at all levels of government. I think that the Trump administration was probably criticized for it pretty heavily at the beginning, at least the beginning of his term. But even probably more significantly, you see nepotism in local government, where family members, people that are living in the same community, are hired, perhaps not because of their merit, but simply because of their connection with the family. And even when there's policies in place that prevent this kind of thing, it still has a way of happening, doesn't it? Victoria notes, not meeting a role that is required by their position, but not in a way that really affects too many people. Yeah, so perhaps there's a duty on your job description that you should be meeting, but there's really not a lot of implications for not meeting it, except for you knowing that you're not meeting it. Good, thank you, Victoria. Michael notes, not trying to be a contrarian, but even a minor violation of ethics in my job could eventually be quite major and lead to a court case and dismissal. Well said, Mike, and I appreciate your focus on managing organizational liability, and I think that's important to note. You know, actions, small unethical actions can lead to very costly lawsuits, and so it's certainly good that you're making note of that, Mike. Inadvertently sharing personal identifiable information. Right, so sometimes ethical violations are inadvertent, they're not intentional, but we certainly should be mindful of those. Gossiping rather than having a needed conversation with an employee. Yes, thank you, Don. You know, that's workplace gossip. Yeah, that, I mean, that is very, that is very pervasive, and there's certainly a lot of benefit in just being open and transparent with those that we work with, instead of talking about them behind their backs. I think, you know, and with COVID, things have changed. A lot of you are doing telework, but you know, the workplace would be a much happier place if there wasn't any workplace gossip. Respect for being on time to program events. Yeah, so punctuality, well noted, Ashley. You know, demonstrating a sense of punctuality and arriving to meetings on time and being engaged. And I'm not, if you showed up late to this meeting, I'm not saying you're, I totally get it, because, you know, with my kids, and sometimes I do my best to show up on time and sometimes can't quite get it. Shauna notes, using company car for personal use during work-related trip. Pretty minor at first, but can have huge consequences if an accident occurs. Well said, Shauna. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, what is considered a seemingly minor action can actually have huge consequences. That connects well with Mike's thought. Dawn notes, caring enough to be prepared for a community meeting. Yes, I think that is, you know, showing a certain level of preparation when we engage with the public. To make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. We were just talking about that. I'm a part of an HOA, and we have a pretty big neighborhood, and I'm on their board, and you know, there've been discussions about raising rates over the last few months, and you know, one of the thoughts of the board was, you know, we can't really raise rates rapidly without public comment and having all our ducks in a row, and make sure that we have the financial statements to show why there might need to be a raise in rates. And that's important, right? Being prepared to engage with the public when they have questions for us. Good, let's see. Good, yeah, in terms of presentation, what you're wearing. Well, that's fantastic, yeah. I was just talking to my students about this, because I sometimes have students that show up to class and like they have their unmade bed right behind them. I can totally see they just kind of slipped out of bed and they rolled into their office chair and they opened up Zoom for class today. And yeah, and so I made sure we have final presentations this week in my 2 classes. And I said, you know, it's important that you are presentable when you're doing like a formal presentation to a city council or to a county commission, and that you should be ready for that. Thank you, Don. But only on the top half, yes. Yes, in fact, if you've read not too long into the pandemic, Walmart reported increased numbers of selling tops, clothing, and you could actually see like noticeable data trends of increased tops as people got ready to present themselves on Zoom. So, and sweatpants, yes. Very good. Yeah. So there are a number of minor ethics violations, and in this second hour, I'm going to have you do 4 mini cases that I've some of them, a couple of them I've written up, and a couple I've gotten from some other sources. Some mini cases that really illustrate the challenges that we face as public administrators and public health administrators in trying to decipher what is the right thing to do when we're faced with these minor decisions. And so the idea is to get you in the mindset of thinking through these issues and seeing the seriousness of them, So before we do that, I want to just cover a few little items here, and that'll give you a framework by which to look at these cases. Okay, so I'm really glad that in the last hour, Dawn brought up the importance of policy. And so I want to talk about two terms, ethical responsibilities and ethical dilemmas. On this first slide, we're going to talk about ethical responsibilities. With ethical responsibilities, the answer is clearly laid out with without subjectivity in your position description or the employee handbook, a code of conduct, or any other policies. So, a good example of this might be, if you see like bruising on a child's back. So going back to our discussion of our case in the last hour, you are ethically and legally responsible to report that bruising on that child's back. There's really no subjectivity in that. That is, you're going to have policy in early childhood that mandates that you follow that. So even if something's a little bit more like subjective, you can always refer to these policies in making unpopular decisions. And sometimes you are presented with unpopular decisions. You have to use this much funds for this type of thing, or you have to, do something in your work a certain way. And you can refer to that policy and say, even though this is unpopular amongst my department or unpopular amongst the public, you can refer to those policies and explain, this is a responsibility of mine. I'm ethically inclined to follow this policy. Now, in the next hour, so we'll talk about how sometimes policies can actually lead to unethical action. So in those cases, what is our responsibility in those? And we'll get to that. But in most cases, policies within our organizations have been well thought through, enough to the point where we can refer to them, and the outcome of referring to that policy gives us an outcome that's good, that has a net benefit. So a good example might be, your boss comes to you and asks you to conceal a report to decision makers that shows countervailing evidence against the benefit of one of your department's initiatives. The policy clearly states that all research should be disclosed to decision makers. You remind your boss of this policy. She agrees that the policy should be followed. That's like your ideal situation, right? Where your boss comes to you and asks you to do something that might be kind of a minor ethics violation, not be fully transparent, not share all the information. Maybe that's even for a good outcome, right? By not sharing this information with policymakers, that will lead to more funding for your agency, your organization, for example. But having a policy to fall back on makes it a ethical responsibility, because you have, it's clearly spelled out in your organization what you should do or don't do. Conversely, ethical dilemmas is an ethical issue that doesn't involve a responsibility. It's a situation with two or more possible resolutions. Both can be justified using ethical principles. Both options may have costs, and I say both options because often these decisions aren't a binary. There are multiple options that can be taken, and that should be noted. But we often think about things in binaries as humans, right? And so if you have two options, they can have costs and benefits. Some groups, individuals will bear the costs. Some will benefit from the decision. Usually in ethical dilemmas, they can rarely be resolved quickly by applying simple rules of thumb. They may not have clear answers, and often deliberation is required. So with ethical dilemmas, there's more subjectivity. The policy is not clear. So there may be a policy in place, but it doesn't provide a clear answer, or there's an absence of policy altogether. So ethical dilemmas are more common than you think, and that's what makes this training so important. Is because as much as Dawn mentioned, we want to create policy that guides our decision making in our organizations. In many cases, we simply can't make enough policy to account for every single ethical dilemma that we're going to be faced with. So, going along with our example on this previous slide of your boss coming to you, after you make your boss aware of this policy, she mandates that you conceal the information or conceal the policy anyway. This is now an ethical dilemma, right? So if your boss asked you to conceal information, what are two options that you are basically faced with in this case? And you can throw follow your boss or follow the rules. Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Yeah, exactly. Those are really the two options that you have. That is an ethical dilemma. How might you go about? Well, as we noted in this slide, sometimes deliberation is required. So maybe there's a trusted colleague that you have that you can go to and talk about, or maybe you have a trusting group of individuals that, and you have to be careful anytime because you don't want to inadvertently whistleblow when you shouldn't, divulge information. So you have to be careful who you talk to. If you have a union, yep. So if you're unionized, and I'm not sure how many of you are unionized in this group, you could get a representative for mediation. Yep, that is exactly true. Yeah, so there are some options here, but both of them are not simple, right? And both outcomes are going to potentially could put your employment at risk. By following your boss, you might be putting your employment at risk. By following the rules, you might be putting your employment at risk. And so, these decisions become much more challenging. Okay, so let's go back to our example here. So that's what we call ethical dilemmas. Now, as I noted here, dilemmas often arise when we have competing loyalties. So here's whenever I ask students, who do you have a loyalty to? Who are you loyal to? The most common answer is the public, right? We are loyal. We should be loyal to the public. We have a commitment to serve the public. And that is so true. And that really is the best answer. However, we also have loyalties to the organization, right? We have to follow policies of the organization. Sometimes the policies of the organization are contrary to the interests of the public. Sometimes, and kind of underneath that is the boss. Sometimes our supervisor has interests that are different from the public or different from the organization. And so we're pulled in a different direction. Many of us we have county commissioners that are, or other political superiors that are over our actions. And sometimes their impact makes our decisions very messy. So maybe some of you are closely following the politics in your city or county, because whoever's in the political office can make our work either more challenging or easier. And so we have competing loyalties, and often ethical dilemmas arise when our loyalties have to compete with one another, when we're pulled in different directions by these different forces. And that's really what constitutes some of the ethical dilemmas that we face. Okay, so let's do some more praxis. We're going to apply your newfound knowledge and what you've also learned in the last hour. So thinking about the difference between ethical responsibilities versus ethical dilemmas, this idea of minor ethical dilemmas, or minor ethical violations. I'm going to have you read 4 mini cases. You can find these in the attachment, second hour breakout room cases, I think is what I call the document there. So open that up on your computer so that you can read, you'll actually read these 4 mini cases together as a group. I would suggest reading one, talking about it, reading one, talking about it, reading one, talking about it, and so forth. I'm going to give you about 20 minutes to go through these cases. And then we, as a class, are going to go over them for about 10 minutes. So be ready to report what your group has discussed in regards to these mini cases. And I think you're really going to enjoy these. So Emily, whenever you're ready, we'll do breakout room.
Adam, I know you like it when people are in the same groups. I just want to ask, because of the shifting around last time, we have 2 groups with about 5 each. Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to set the clock for 20 minutes, and you guys should all get your little invites again. Oop, there it is.
Awesome. Okay, good. Well, welcome back, everyone. I had a chance just to quickly tune into your breakout groups, and I hope, did you enjoy those cases? You kind of give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Were those enjoyable cases to tackle in your breakout rooms? Good. Yeah, these are great cases. I really enjoy talking about them, and I think they demonstrate, all of them, that there really are minor ethical dilemmas. The first one is one that I have, I wrote up because I've particularly had this kind of situation pop up. Like, when is it right to use resources of? So we'll go ahead and jump into it. So let me bring up the first case, and we're going to talk about these as a group. I'll call on somebody from each group to kind of report what you talked about, but let's go ahead and read this first case again. So it's Friday afternoon. You're very much ready for the workday to end at 5 p.m. Plans to meet up with, special someone for a date to the local theater, only 2 blocks away from your workplace. The show time is at 5:15, and you must bring printed tickets to the show. Unfortunately, you forgot to print the tickets. Your home is a 50-minute drive away. If you drive home, you risk being late to the show by as much as 20 to 30 minutes. You have noticed your boss and a few other coworkers using the work printer to print personal things now and again. Is this an ethical dilemma, and what should you do? So let's go ahead and I'll call on Matt. Would you be willing to report, and your group members can jump in at any point, but would you be willing to kind of share with the rest of the class what you guys discussed with this case?
Yeah, I feel like we were kind of split on this, where some people were like saying, no, if it's the policy, you shouldn't. And other people kind of brought up the point that, well, I often print stuff at home for work. So if I print something at work for home once, I've more than made up for it, so to speak. Like a trade-off. And then someone else brought up the point, well, what if there's another option? What if, there's like, digital tickets, or if you go to the box office, say, hey, I forgot to print the tickets, but I ordered them, here's my name and phone number. They can usually confirm that you ordered them. So there may be alternatives as well. And also I think somebody mentioned with how minor it is, like it's 2 sheets of paper. It's not like you're printing a whole book. You can always just ask for permission. If you've seen your boss doing it, then your boss probably can't tell you you can't do it. So if you just ask your boss, maybe the boss will say, oh yeah, it's fine, just don't make a habit of it. Or I mean, just if you did it and then if someone does say something, just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I just had to quick print something. But it's either way, it's a relatively minor situation.
Okay, good. Anything to add from your group members?
Well, even though it's minor, I'm not sure it's considered a dilemma because the policy is clear cut. So would that be an ethical responsibility as opposed to a dilemma? I mean, we have a dilemma because we've seen other people doing it, but isn't one of the distinctions whether the policy is clear cut versus kind of more ambiguous?
Right. So good. Exactly. So you kind of have a situation here, and I'll look at these comments that I see here in the chat box in a second. But yeah, to your point, Don, right, the policy specifically states something, but when you see widespread kind of I guess I don't want to say ignoring, but yeah, essentially like that policy isn't really followed. It's more of a it seems like it's perceived more as a guideline in the organization, right? What is the distinction there? And I think that's where something probably moves from the ethical responsibility and perhaps starts to shift over, at least if you think about it as a spectrum, more over towards that ethical dilemma, because now you're faced with a decision where the answer maybe isn't as clear. Okay, good thought. Let's see. Mike says, Shauna says, it can add up, so it becomes a slippery slope. Then it becomes a problem when too many people do it. The policy should dictate. Okay, so let's move over. Thank you. I'll call you group 1, I guess. So group number 2. Terry, would you mind, Shauna made a comment. Is there anything that your group discussed about this case in addition to Shauna's point there?
I think Terry was in group
Yeah.
1 with us.
Oh, Terry, were you group 1? Oh, you were.
Yeah, I was
That's
in
right.
group 1.
Oh, sorry, Terry. Let's see. So Shauna, would you be willing to elaborate on your comment there in the chat box and anything else your group talked about?
Oh, yeah, sure. So one person said, Michael said that it's not ethical, that he thinks that they should print the ticket, let your boss know later. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so Michael said that it's not ethical, that we should print the tickets and let your boss know later. And if you weren't already told that you could use it occasionally. So I think the issue for me becomes, is it in the policy or not? And because like you said before, you know, is it going to be a rule that people follow, or is it going to be a rule that everybody just kind of knows is not enforced, so it becomes a free-for-all eventually? So that's my concern. Is it in the policy or is not? I think another one of our participants, Robin, I think, said that maybe some printers say if you do personal printing, then you pay for it like 10 cents or 5 cents or whatever the case may be. So for me, the policy should dictate. Is it yes? Is it no? Is it compensatable? So let's see what it says and we go from there. But if there's no word on it, I don't think it should be done, because where do you draw the line? And you know, what's simple to us, 1 or 2 pages becomes 10 pages for another, and then it's no big deal. And before you know it, we're using it like it's our personal printer.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you bring up some valid points here, Shauna, that I appreciate. This idea that it's, you know, the slippery slope argument that, you know, once one person uses the printer for personal use, then it kind of creates a culture where it becomes the norm, right? And if everyone is doing it, then all of a sudden, you know, you're seeing a substantial amount of paper and ink being used for personal use. And so, I mean, yeah, thinking about kind of the broader implications of that. Yeah, any other thoughts that you would be willing to share? You know, things that other issues that come up arise as a result of this case.
It's really interesting because personal responsibility kind of starts coming into this, where you think about time management. You know, the person clearly, you know, is there a time management issue on the person who pushed their time so much that now they're going to be late? So just to know if that's a principle or
Yeah,
what that would go under, but you know what I mean? Yeah, that comes into play.
yeah, and particularly if it's a show where like they close the doors, you know, one of those, you have to be there on time, otherwise you're locked out. That's certainly, yeah. So here's the thing with this case, and again, like, I'm not here to tell you like this is the right answer, right? This is what the decision that you should make in this case, but to give you a framework by which you can operate and be mindful about these decisions, right? And approach them from an ethical framework that gives you the tools to make the right choice. And so I think in this group, there's a few points that are worth, or in this discussion, there's a few points worth bringing out. And, you know, that is the idea that, you know, one minor ethical action, when it's aggregated with a lot of other ethical actions, unethical actions, that can contribute to a culture of you know, of kind of disdain or ignoring of ethical rules and norms, right? And that's certainly something that you know, we want to avoid. And so sometimes we think that decisions are small, but when you aggregate all those together, it does demonstrate like a culture of unethics in an organization. And we certainly don't want that. And that's something to be mindful of. Having an open communication with your boss, you know, you might say like, hey, I wasn't sure if I should print, you know, a personal thing. And sometimes just somebody speaking out about it and noting like, this kind of seems like, is this something we can do? Everyone kind of self-reflects and goes, well, maybe we shouldn't, right? And so it leads to collective discussions in your organization about what is what is right, what is the right thing to do, which you want those discussions to be taking place, all right? And, you know, thinking about, you know, but also thinking about like, you have like the, you know, the, like the kind of the strictness of the law, but then also kind of the spirit of this policy, right? And you know, talking about like maybe there are certain cases where like an exemption can be made, right? And not, you know, consistently being strict, like, yeah, this one time this is fine, but you know, and the other thing, you know, I've also thought about one of you brought up the point. I think this was Matt. That you know, sometimes, you know, you use your own personal resources for work, and I've also kind of thought about this, like, you know, if I use my own personal resources for work, you know, how much can I use work resources for personal use? And I think the challenge with that is you can't actually like do the math, like this piece of paper or this ink, or, you know, even going further than that, and like, you know, this stapler that I bring home, or this work laptop that I bring home and I sometimes use it for personal use. It's difficult to quantify, like, you know, tit for tat, this for that. And so it makes it challenging, like using that logic. And so you have to be mindful of that. Unless you can quantify it and you know that, you know, I use this much of my work or personal resources for this or that, it does become challenging for that one. So just a few thoughts there. Let's move on to our next case. Glad we spent a lot of good quality time on that one. So let's read the next one. Okay, so teleworking and COVID-19. I thought this, I decided to write this one up and include it because I think it's so relevant. So you're an employee for the county health department. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, you're currently teleworking 5 days a week. This might be some of you, or maybe 4 or 3 times a week. Normally, you're expected to work from 8 to 5 with a 1-hour lunch break at midday. Although with the newness of teleworking at your agency, this is not spelled out specifically in the policy. Your best friend invites you to lunch at a local park, Lake Park, at noon. After lunch, your friend begs you to stay for another 2 hours to swim and enjoy the warm weather. You're not certain if this is breaking the rules. You have no scheduled appointments for the rest of the afternoon, and you can easily make up those hours later in the evening. 2020 has been a rough year, and you could use some time to relax a bit. Is this an ethical dilemma, and what would you do? So let's touch base with group 2 first. Let's see. Let's touch. Is it Lilia? Is that how you say your name? Would you be willing to share what your group discussed? Lilia, are you there? Or Robin, perhaps? Robin, are you there? They've probably all stepped away. Michael, would you be willing to mention what your group has discussed in that case?
Yeah, sure. A lot of it, just real
Thanks,
quick here. Yeah, a lot of it revolves around public perception and what your role is as a modeler of safe behavior at this time. So doing something in the public anytime right now is probably not the best thing, especially hang out with someone who's not essential for you to be around, because you're putting yourself in the community at risk for continued COVID spread. But it might be something that's better to put your friend off for now and check in first to get some kind of time arranged that you could do that with your work, so that you have that already rather than just taking off.
Yeah, so an interesting point, some interesting points there, Mike. And you know, I kind of connect it with, like, if I'm teleworking, you know, because I am teleworking as faculty, I only go to campus a couple times a week. You know, if I decide to mow the lawn at 3 in the afternoon, and my professors, my neighbors know that I'm faculty on campus, you know, can that, you know, even though maybe it's not an impropriety, like perhaps I'm going to make up those hours later in the evening. Maybe it's the appearance of impropriety. So, okay, an interesting thought. Let's touch base with the other group. So Terry, we'll ask you, what are some points that your group brought up in the discussion of this case?
Well, we had some of the similar discussions. 2020 2020 has been a rough year, and so it's very attractive to think about taking an extra 2 hours and staying at the lake. But I think at the end, we said, clearly this would be contrary to policy, but possibly something that could be worked out individually with your supervisor. So say no to today's visit to the lake, but you might be able to negotiate with your boss and adjust your work schedule so that it could be possible in the future, i.e. giving you flexible work hours. So, change it from 8 to 5 to, some other schedule that would allow you to work more effectively in the evening or something like that.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Terry. Anything else to add from your group?
We talked a lot about accountability to your teammates. So being forthright with them. So if, they're expecting, you may not have appointments on your schedule, but if you're a person who gets a lot of calls that you need to answer, if you're swimming, you can't necessarily get those. But if you're the kind of person who's just going to be working on a report anyways, it might be a little bit easier to just, make up those hours in the evening if you know that nobody ever calls you ever anyways. So, but we figured as long as you're kind of forthright with your people and say, hey, like, I'm not going to be reachable for these 2 hours, maybe not tell them that you're swimming because they might be mad at you about that. I don't know, like if they're working really hard all the time and you're like, well, I'm swimming for 2 hours. But just say, hey, but I'm reachable, later in the evening. I'll be making this up in the evening.
Interesting. Yeah. So Victoria, you're kind of your group, makes an interesting point that sometimes the dilemma that we face can differ based on like time and context. And, some of us, the nature of our jobs, even though we don't have appointments, we're getting a lot of calls, which would mean, if we leave our workstation for that amount of time, perhaps we're shirking a duty to, be available and be responsive to the public or to coworkers that are in need of our expertise and our assistance during the workday. However, maybe, and this is the case with me. I almost never get calls on my office phone, even before COVID. Students often send me these emails, some of which are difficult to decipher, and so that's if I can kind of consistently check my email, that's how I'm able to be responsive. And so perhaps the case changes a little bit if we know that there's not anyone that is going to be reaching out to us in need. But then again, at the same time, can we ever know that, right? Is there, it could be that one time where we decide to, go swimming, and that's when there's an emergency in our department and it's an all hands on deck situation and we happen to not be there. And usually, that's when it would happen, of course. That's when the emergency situation would happen. Good. Other thoughts with this case? Yeah. So in terms of it being an ethical dilemma, I think because the policy is not clear, again, that starts to ride the line between an ethical responsibility versus an ethical dilemma. And again, what makes a good case is one that there's not a clear answer, and that's often with these sorts of cases. Let's do one more. In the interest of time here, let's move on to our next case. The case of gift giving, which I know a lot of you face if you're doing home visits. This is an issue that when I did a training last year for the Gallatin County City County Health Department, and we spent a whole 10-15 minutes talking about gift giving because a lot of their employees deal with this situation. I think this is very timely and relevant, so let's tackle it. You work as a public health director for a county government. You just negotiated a 5-year contract for your department with a computer firm that will handle all computer maintenance issues. The owner of the computer firm gives you 3 tickets to an NBA game featuring Denver Nuggets versus Portland Trail Blazers. Sorry if you're not a fan of either of those teams. Your daughter would be thrilled to watch the game. Do you take the tickets? Is there a conflict of interest since the contract has already been signed? Is this an ethical dilemma? What would you do? So what are your thoughts? Let's start with group 1 on this case. Maybe I'll touch base with Dawn. Dawn, what are some things your group talked about as you explored this case?
I think most people felt that the conflict of interest policy around that was pretty clear cut, that you don't accept gifts from a client or a vendor. And same goes with if you are in somebody's home doing some sort of inspection or assessment in the capacity of a public health employee, that's also a no-no to accept any kind of gift or ticket. So I think we felt pretty clear on that.
Okay. Yeah, so imagine if let's do a few hypotheticals here just for fun. And I'll ask your group first. What if the gift was like not something that was like a ticket, but maybe some food or something. They offer you like a little plate of cookies or something of that nature. Does that at all change your decision?
Well, this is more of another question than an answer, but what if the plate of cookies was for the office as opposed to for you as an individual?
Ah, yes.
Does that change it?
It's a good follow-up. It's a good follow-up.
I don't know the answer, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it would be, I would probably automatically accept it because I do that sort of stuff to friends and neighbors, but yeah, I guess I don't know if that falls into that gift giving category. I guess it probably does.
Yeah. So some agencies have a policy where if the gift exceeds 25, usually the most common I've seen in codes of ethics or in employee handbooks around Montana, because I've looked at like a ton of those, is like $25 or less. If it's $25 or less, then you can accept the gift. But that also is in some policies they say no cash payments. And so if it's like a gift card to Subway for $20 or, like a plate of cookies, that's okay. But in many cases, there's an absence of policy. There's nothing there to guide your decision-making. And so, yeah, if it is for the office, if it is for you personally, you have to make that determination. And that, of course, it can be a challenge. Good. So let's go to group two. Group two. Was there any additional thoughts or comments that you had in regards to this case? If Robin is there, or Lilia, or go ahead, Robin.
I think the state of Montana has $50, but I'm not sure. My husband used to get like a basket for Christmas, but he would share it with the office, and I think he always said that forthright that, oh, this is nice, I'll just put it up, this is for the whole lab, kind of
right.
idea.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Robin. So Robin essentially said that sometimes the office is awarded the gift basket, and it goes towards the office kind of as a gift. And again, these are, some offices might be more inclined to receive that. Others might have a policy, and they make their clients aware of that policy. Like, oh, thank you so very much, but we actually can't receive this gift. And again, this is a distinction that we have to make. Does the gift create the appearance of impropriety, right? If looking from the outside, if this was reported in the New York Times, would it make us a little bit uncomfortable? And that's kind of the benchmark that I like to set. If I receive a gift from like a student, I've had a student give me markers before, like, little expo markers as a gift. And, that's something that I'm able to use like for my job. And so, I accepted that gift, right? Sometimes they'll get I'll get cards and things like that. I often don't get cash payments or gift cards. But if I were to receive something like that, particularly before giving out final grades, I might be inclined to say no to the gift because I don't want there to be an appearance of impropriety, that I received this gift prior to issuing final grades. Maybe I give this student like a grade that others would perceive as an inflated grade. Maybe others would say they deserved a B, and I gave them a B+ or an A-. And then it calls into question, did this receiving this gift card at all influence your decision in the final grade process? And so that's something that as a professor, I have to be mindful about, of the appearance of impropriety and how that could impact other people's perceptions of my fair and equitable decision making. And so that's really kind of the benchmark in these decisions. And so again, I can't tell you what's right or wrong, but really a good framework is to think about, would this make me uncomfortable if this was reported in the New York Times, right? You know, how might these actions be perceived by those outside of my sphere of influence? So just a thought there to keep in mind. Okay, well, any other comments or thoughts? I think we're going to skip case 4, but I know you guys had some good discussions in either one of your groups about that one. Are there any other comments or thoughts that you have in regards to these cases that you'd like to share with the group before we take a break? Okay, awesome. Well, so let's see, where are we at here? Yeah, so it is time for a 5-minute break. Don't take a nap, but go and perhaps, you know, refresh a little bit, and we'll be back. We'll come back at about 11:15 for our third hour segment of our training today. Thanks, everyone. Okay, well, it looks like people are coming back in, so we'll go ahead and jump back into our third hour of our training today. It looks like I missed a comment from, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Lilia. You said, I think it's like you said, it depends. Definitely would not take money or tickets. During COVID times, community members have dropped off cookies, candy, or sweets for the office. Yeah, and you know, you certainly, you know, if somebody drops it off and leaves, or you know, it does, you know, it makes it challenging. You so good. I'm glad I said your name right. Thanks. Yeah, you know, during this time, people are out to just do a good deed and don't expect anything in return or favoritism. So, you know, that's important to note. Okay, well, let's jump into let me bring back my screen here. Here's a little Snoopy meme for you. You know, my neighbor across the street, actually, was just thinking about him. He's a Snoopy fanatic. During the holidays and even during Halloween, he has these blow-up Snoopy things that he puts all over his yard. And apparently him and his wife, inside their home, they have a tree that they decorate with all Snoopy stuff. And they just planted like a little tree in their yard, and they surround it with all the characters from all the Charlie Brown characters surrounding the tree, like the movie that some of us grew up on watching. And so anyway, he's a Snoopy fanatic. Okay, so here's our third hour thought activity to get us going for our third hour. We're gonna jump into now. We've talked about personal, more so personal ethics and making, you know, personal decisions using an ethical framework. But now we're going to look at, let me see this, hold on a second, but let me bring up the chat so I make sure I'm not missing. So true, yeah, thanks, Emily. So now we're going to move into more organizational ethics and how organizations can participate in ethical behavior. So in your notes, write down any ethical dilemmas that you believe the current pandemic presents to public health in terms of the allocation of resources or services provided. Take just 30 seconds or so to make those, or to note that in your notes there, and then share your thoughts there in the comment box. Good, I see some coming in here. Let me just take a look. Okay, Michael, yes, there are worse addictions. Yeah, so addictions, alcoholism, drug abuse, we're seeing a rise as a result of the pandemic.
That's a good point, but I think that was in regard to the Snoopy addiction of your neighbor.
Oh, oh.
It was still a good point.
Yeah. Oh, I see. I didn't see that comment right there. So, okay, now I'm getting it. That is so funny. You know, a Snoopy addiction during the pandemic, I don't think would be a bad thing. I think we all could use a little bit more Charlie Brown in our life. I need to, it's been a long time since I have read, I used to read the funny section, you know, growing up as a kid. And that was just, I could use some more funny sections in my life, but I haven't subscribed to the newspaper as an adult. I always just, I need to look at that. So, well, thanks, Mike. Let's see, keeping lab supplies for personal use, mask and gloves. That is very interesting. I have, it's interesting that you note that, because I know somebody who has potentially done some of that. I think I've noticed them using a very nice mask that I think they use for surgery or other things, right? I don't want to name names or anything, but surgeon that I happen to know in town here. Who gets vaccines? Supplies will most likely be limited, right? So who gets the vaccine, I think, is a big question that is being thrown around in the media. And from a public health perspective, we have to ask that question as well. Who gets testing if those are limited still? That was a question that we were asking at the beginning of the pandemic, but right, if you see if we do see supplies start to diminish, who will get tested? Also, in my mind, who gets testing quicker? You know, my brother, he's a doctor. His test results come back same day, but for me, it takes a few days, right? Obviously. Let's see, yeah, nice. How PPE is distributed, good. Matt mentioned that. Many states, Terry, have decided to share COVID address data with law enforcement to help them to avoid inadvertent exposures, right? So, you know, in terms of privacy and maintaining privacy, what information is shared? Vaccines and PPE supplies limited. Thank you, Robin. And Mike's noted business operators expecting HD staff to enforce COVID compliance amongst their customers rather than doing it themselves. Yeah, that's really interesting, Mike. Good. So I think all of these encompass very well a sense of organizational and personal ethics that we've seen arise as a result of this pandemic. Now, you know, when a pandemic's going on, it is, you know, I think it's very easy to see a lot of knee-jerk reactions or knee-jerk decisions that are made. And at some point, we have to sit back and think about the decisions and the implications of these decisions that we make in terms of how they influence public trust and also how they impact the distribution of resources in an equitable way. So I hope that the framework I provide for you on this issue will be helpful for you as you think about organizational ethics. So that's what we're going to talk about. Good. So let's see. Let me make sure I went over. Okay. Yeah. So let's jump back into my presentation here. So great thoughts. I think a good way of thinking about any distribution of resources, but particularly during a pandemic, is thinking about it from the prism of the 4 pillars of public administration. Okay. These here are the 4 pillars of public administration, which basically represent the overarching objectives of the public sector and specifically public health in this context. So these 4 pillars are economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and equity. Economy, of course, deals with, you know, when it comes to spending public dollars. This is particularly true in times of tight budgets, which some of you have experienced particularly in public health in the state. We have seen some budgets decrease over time. The expectation is that public services will be provided in the most economic manner possible. In general, economy, this pillar, is thought of as careful or sparing use of resources. So in thinking about like a principle that might align, an ethical principle that aligns with this, being good stewards of precious public resources is an example of economy as a pillar of public administration, avoiding government waste, and so on. Efficiency, in practice, you know, efficiency, this next pillar, is often thought of in terms of process efficiencies, reflected in measures such as timely plowing of streets, short turnaround times on applications, or in this case, short turnaround times on you know, test results for COVID, for example, short lines at government offices or in any of our offices trying to mitigate the length of lines of people waiting for us to respond. It can also be reflected through reduced waiting times for trials, faster responses for emergency services, or making our offices one-stop shopping options. And so instead of sending, clients here or there, let me refer you to this office, or press 1 to go to this office. Trying to make our services as efficient as possible. So really, the principle here is being responsive to the public, being quick and efficient, and not sending them on a hunt to find where they can find the services to meet their needs. So that's how it, of course, connects with public health. Next is effectiveness. Simply put, effectiveness is being successful in producing a desired result or accomplishing a set of goals. So this really connects with the consequences aspect of our ethics discussion in the first hour. Effectiveness really deals with outcomes. Surely in public health, the outcomes that we want is lower infection rates. That is the main goal we have right now. When infection rates are increasing, that is an indication that perhaps we're not being as effective in the delivery of services or in the distribution of information to the public, in letting them know what is safe or not safe, or perhaps in the policies that our county or state offices are implementing to curb infection rates. And so being effective means that we are producing outcomes that are beneficial to the public and to public health. And finally, equity. A famous public administration scholar known as Frederickson once wrote, "The most productive governments, the most efficient governments, and the most economizing governments can still be perpetuating poverty, inequality of opportunity, and injustice." So it's important to note that even when we're being the most economical, or being the most efficient or responsive, and we're producing what is seemingly good outcomes, we could still be leaving behind this fourth pillar of public administration, and that is equity. So while economy, efficiency, and effectiveness deal with how government agencies operate, equity delves into the questions of for whom government operates. So we're going to look at a case here that I think will illustrate this point of showing how a government can be meeting all of its objectives in terms of these first pillars, but perhaps leaving behind this fourth pillar. So this case is I love this case. This has to do with streetlights in the city of Seattle. Now, as part of my work on an HOA, we're getting people that call us and say, "Hey, our streets are out," and so we've been thinking about how to replace streetlights. And there are some areas of our HOA that have been hit with incidents of crime. And so we have to think about, are these areas that have been hit with incidents of crime, are these ones that the streetlights have gone out and we haven't been responsive in terms of replacing those streetlights? So in this case, the city of Seattle waited for residents to report non-working streetlights before they would replace bulbs. So a streetlight would go out, then they would wait for a report to come in from someone reporting the outage, and then they would replace the bulb. Residents who were refugees, lived below the poverty line, and were people of color avoided interacting with government wherever possible. Therefore, streetlights in their neighborhoods were often left out. The city changed the policy to schedule the replacement of bulbs based on the life expectancy of the lights instead of waiting for complaints. What that means is that sometimes bulbs that were still working would get replaced, but it was based upon the idea that these lights would go out in the relatively near future. Poor residents benefited with better lighting, and wealthier residents benefited from no longer having to call to report outages in their neighborhoods. So my question for you, and we can kind of have a discussion here, you can include your comments in the chat box or just unmute yourself and speak. Why do you think that Seattle had its original policy in place for replacing streetlight bulbs? And secondly, how was this policy lacking in promotion of social equity, this fourth pillar of public administration? And how is the new policy responsive to that pillar of public administration? So take a few moments to think about those questions. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here. So again, the first question is, what do you think that Seattle had, or why do you think Seattle had its original policy in place for replacing street light bulbs? And then how was this policy lacking? So let's take a look here. I noticed one come up in the chat. So Victoria notes the original policy was written by people who weren't poor, refugees, etc. So they didn't even possibly even think about it. And that's possibly true, right? So those that, perhaps in the decision-making process of that policy, those that were the decision makers didn't perhaps consider, some of those issues because they themselves, aren't in that particular group. Yeah. I suspect that they thought they were empowering citizens by allowing them to be the trigger for light replacement. Yeah, well said, Terry. I think so. I think the intentions behind this policy weren't bad. I think in adopting this policy, the idea is that you rely on citizen engagement, which is a good thing to try and make those changes. Matt noted, it's more economical to wait until the bulb is dead to replace it. Exactly, right? So in terms of, thinking about simplistically in terms of, the economic aspect, that first pillar of public administration, you can see that it makes sense to, let the bulb die out and then purchase a new one. You could also look at the kind of the flip side of that argument, but by just having a system in place that bulbs are replaced, that actually might be more efficient, that crews go out and replace bulbs, in specific neighborhoods that are about to go out. So you don't have somebody having to receive calls, accept that report from a constituent, and then, then send that report on to the street operations department. So maybe there is more economy in streamlining this process with the focus on equity. Let's see, Michael noticed old policy got the most life out of the lights and used less staff time, economy of resources. New policy allows for better public results with less involvement on their part for all. Yeah, good point, Michael. And Don noted the original policy may have been focused on economics and efficiency and being responsive to citizens, right? So yeah, I mean, from when you are focusing on economy or efficiency, there is a sense of responsiveness there. It's not like you're not being totally unresponsive to your to clients, your constituency, but at the same time, you're it gets back to the utilitarian principle, right? Maybe they looked at this from the utilitarian principle that the greatest good for the greatest number, right? And the old policy certainly seemed like it would initiate the greatest good for the greatest number. But after evaluating that policy, we find that it leaves out a large swath of people and doesn't serve them in the best way possible. And so the city of Seattle, in making this policy change, they were able to elicit more equity in their response to the public, thereby making it really a more ethical policy, right? And so I hope you can see from this case how it illustrates how organizationally sometimes we have policies in place that aren't the most ethical, they're not the most responsive, and that we can change policies to better address the needs of the people that we serve. Victoria notes, how many policies depend on civic engagement for basic utilities, and how many residents know that these utilities depend on their engagement? Right, so Victoria makes a good point here that the city of Seattle had this expectation that people would just know that, if you move into the community, you move into Seattle, you would just know that that this was the policy in place. Having that expectation certainly lacks a sense of responsiveness to the people that you serve.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because this happened to me when I was in high school. I had to take a bus to school, and the street light that was right over my bus stop went out, and I didn't realize that I was supposed to do anything about it, and nobody in the area did anything about it. And after like many days of waiting in the dark, I kind of brought it up to my mom, and she was like, "Oh, we're supposed to call them about that." And then it took several days for them to fix it. So I was kind of like, who knew that that was a thing that we needed to do? Because I just kind of
Yeah.
assumed that the city would take care of it.
Yeah, and in the case, that's a great point, Victoria. You know, in the case of Missoula, I think that they do a reporting system as well. And so, you know, in our case, and they rely on like HOAs. There's several HOAs that will report to the city, like when lights are out. Some lights, I think, are owned and operated by HOAs, some by the city. I know when my light went out on our corner, I reported it, and literally within a couple of days, it was replaced. And they replaced it with this really, really bright LED bulb. And so the other day I went out to look at Mars, you know, because Mars was one of the, there was a couple weeks ago, you know, and I got out my binoculars. I was kind of that nerd that went out at like 11 p.m. and was trying to look at Mars, and there was all this light pollution from this new bulb that they just replaced. I kind of went, oh, darn, why did I report this? You know, because now there's all this light pollution. Which of course, you know, in terms of preventing crime is a good thing. So good. So this, I think this case illustrates some important points about organizational ethics and about balancing the pillars of public administration: economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and equity in terms of how we approach organizational ethics. So let's jump, so let's do some more application practice time here. So I wanted to give you some cases that were a little bit more comprehensive in their details. So you'll notice in the third hour cases and the attachments that you were sent, there are 2 cases. What I'd like you to do is take about 20 minutes. We'll do about, yeah, I'm just looking at my clock here. We'll do about, let's go ahead and just do 15 minutes. 15 minutes and read and discuss this first case, childhood obesity educational campaign disclaimer, with your group. And if you have time, I welcome you if your conversation starts to lull, to start looking at this second case. I don't know if you'll have time for that, probably not. So you can take a look at that at a later date. But thinking about what we've talked about with the pillars of public administration and organizational ethics, go ahead and read this case as a group. So just have somebody read it out loud to the rest of the group, and then have answer the discussion questions that I have for that case. So whenever you're ready, looks like the breakout rooms are ready to go. Well, welcome back from the breakout room. I was able to tune in on some of your discussions there, and I was really enjoying what I was hearing from your discussions. So nice work in tackling this case. This again is a more comprehensive case, and there's a lot more details involved in terms of what's the role of public health in ensuring positive outcomes for the constituency or the group of folks that they're trying to target and assist. And so let's go ahead and start with group 2 this time. Shauna, would you mind kind of giving a summation of what your group talked about for the discussion of this case?
Sure. Unfortunately, we hadn't gotten very far. We were reading the responses of one of our members, which I don't have access to right now. Oh, yep, there they are.
Yeah, so jump in, Michael, when if you want.
Yeah, if you want to summarize what you said, Michael, that would be great. No, I'm not hearing from Michael. So, we were talking about just answering the questions, the role of the health department and how effective shock messaging is. And in this case, it probably would not be very effective. But one of the things I was concerned about, just without even diving into the solution of the problem or even just the question, was the problem of equity in trying to address the problem. Regardless of what solutions we may come up with, we have to look at how the neighborhoods, how the communities are first structured. And I was saying that, you know, from an equity standpoint and being a member of a minority community, there are certain things that are not equal across all communities. Grocery stores are one things that are not readily available in minority communities. Trails, access to outside exercise. The structure of the family unit may not allow for kids to be involved in activities that can help to bring, you know, that healthy lifestyle around. So before we can even say, oh, you need to do this in order to lower the obesity rate, my suggestion or my first inquiry would be, what is your life like? What is the structure of your environment? What is available to you? Because even though, you know, you can go to school and be exposed to healthier meals, what is your neighborhood like? What's making you make these choices? Why is it kind of difficult to enforce? Even if we get the message of how to eat healthy, is it something we can all incorporate into our lives as they are right now? That was
Right.
one.
Yeah,
Thank you, Shauna. Oh,
yeah,
I
go
was
ahead,
just
Mike.
going to say thank you, Shauna. I was having trouble getting unmuted, but you said it much better than I could have.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think, just in thinking about summing up what you said there, it really it really has to do with that virtue of empathy, right? So when we're in the policy making process, when we're thinking about marketing and advertising, when we're thinking about other aspects or policies that we make as public health administrators, we do have to try and approach those empathetically. That is the ethical thing to do, right? Is to be to show a sense or degree of empathy in thinking about the populations that our advertising might impact. So thank you, Shauna. Let's go to group one. Let's see. Victoria, would you mind kind of giving a summation of what your group talked about in discussion of this case?
Sure. I think we also kind of covered a lot of the stuff that Shauna's group was talking about as far as the equity and like kind of the built environment stuff that people have to face. We mentioned we didn't really think it was that much of an ethical dilemma because there's, scientific evidence to back up that, shock value doesn't really teach people how to do behavioral change. And it doesn't really empower or inspire them to do it either. It might actually make them feel worse. It can stigmatize populations and they, will just kind of be completely unengaged.
Right.
That as the duty of the, like a leader in the public health department, you need to focus on, what the most recent science and evidence shows. So the educational campaign is the one that we chose as the best. I forget the other questions.
Just the advantages and disadvantages
Oh
of
yeah,
the strategy.
advantages of the shock campaign is that it grabs your attention, but again, it makes people feel bad and they might not learn anything about it. The advantages of the educational campaign is that you kind of are actually teaching people things that they might actually be able to use, though it might not be as sexy or interesting. We did talk also about how a lot of kids, they really do, understand healthy eating and healthy ways and decisions, but they're not necessarily the ones who get to do the meal planning, or maybe mom and dad work all the time, or they don't have access to the food like Shauna was mentioning. So how do you empower little kids or even teens to kind of change their families lifestyle? So we talked about how important it was not just to focus on the children, but to focus on the parents as well.
Right, and I think that's an interesting point. Just that idea of thinking about who we are duty bound to, connecting it back to our our discussion at the beginning, and just the idea that our actions can have unequitable, or I guess have inequitable outcomes for the populations that we serve. And so we have to, part of operating from an ethical capacity is using the best information that we have available to us to ensure that we are, treating different, groups, in this case, obese children, with respect in terms of, how we're going about our actions. Other thoughts from group one that you had at all, or group two, in regards to this case? Just a few other, thoughts that I have. I think it's important that, going back to our discussion about the pillars of public administration, it's oftentimes that these pillars will conflict with one another. So sometimes the most efficient action is not the most equitable action. Sometimes the most economic action may not be the most effective, right? So it may not, even though it's the most economical, it may not give us the outcomes that we're specifically seeking. Okay, so in doing this case study and in thinking about ethics from this vantage point, what I want you to consider is how, when you're sitting in department meetings and you're thinking about, like, what is the best outcome, or what are our priorities moving forward, thinking about it from this prism of efficiency, economy, effectiveness, and equity, and thinking about balancing those two, and not ignoring or leaving behind any one of those pillars, to totally stress just one or totally stress just another, but having having a good balance of those pillars, and so that as public health administrators, you're not only operating in the most equitable way or in the most ethical way, but you're also achieving outcomes that really do contribute to the welfare of society and do benefit a lot of people, but also don't just ignore the minority or leave behind a certain group of people. And so I think, and what this case study illustrates is the importance as organizations of thinking through our tactics and thinking through our strategies, and not making quick decisions in these meetings that we have, but being willing to kind of speak up and say, I think that is a very efficient option, but it may not give us the outcomes that we want, or it may disparage this group over this group, and we may want to avoid doing that, and bringing those issues to the table. Good. So any other thoughts or comments that you have regarding this case or this segment of our training today? Okay, awesome. So we're going to take our last, so I see that it's noon. This training is supposed to end at 1, so we're going to take our last 5-minute break and to give you a chance to refresh before our last 55 minutes so of our training today. So we'll go ahead and come back together at about 12:09 for the remaining segment of our training. Thanks, everyone. Okay, well, it looks like we're all kind of coming back here. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the fourth final segment of our training today. I appreciate you sticking with me. Again, a 4-hour Zoom meeting is a long time, and so I hope that you'll leave this training with tools that you need to to be ethical public servants moving forward. We're going to spend some time in this last segment, basically talking about some specific skills that you can take with you after this training that I'm going to spend some time talking about today. Let me adjust my chair here. Okay, so let me share my screen. All right, so we've had our break time. So we're going to start off this by talking about the classic Friedrich-Feiner debate. So a little bit more ethical theory here, which I love talking about, but it fits so well with this last segment. The Friedrich-Feiner debate is a timely debate between two scholars of public administration that basically debated, how much do public administrators need external controls versus their own inner checks. Friedrich basically argued that public administrators must rely on an inner check that guides them in democratic principles. We've spent much of our discussion today talking about, those minor ethical violations and how you personally can deal with those minor ethical violations and approach them. Friedrich noted that relying on judgment of well-trained administrators results in the balanced and judicious use of discretion. Okay, and so that's of course what we've tried to accomplish today is, giving you some training so that you can be balanced and judicious in your use of discretion. Only those with high ethical standards should be hired, according to Friedrich. And so a very interesting argument. Feiner, on the other hand, argued that external controls such as rules, procedures, and threat of penalty are necessary to guide workers' actions. That public servants should be clearly directed, and that ethics guides can potentially be manipulated. And so Feiner, on the other hand, kind of makes, sees human nature, as more negatively, and makes the argument that really you need controls in place to ensure that people are operating, within the bounds of ethics. And so, this, and I'll let you kind of decide where you come down on this debate. But from my vantage point, it's kind of somewhere in between, right? That it's good to have external controls in place, but at the same time, you also want people to have an inner check. So we're going to talk about both of these in this last segment. We're going to talk about some inner checks that you can have, that you can adopt, but also we're going to spend the last half of our final segment here talking about codes of ethics and what your organization can do to ensure ethical or compliance with ethical values and norms in your organizations. So I want you to think about developing your own ethical competence, right? That's the goal of this training. Your inner check for, perhaps more long-term decision-making. So when you deal with an ethical dilemma, it's important that you adopt this framework that I think is helpful in making good decisions. So part of the problem that public administrators face is when they do face ethical dilemmas, they don't define the problem correctly. And so the first step really is to think about think about the problem itself. What is the problem that you are facing? Why are you facing this problem? If you don't identify the problem correctly, then it ultimately influences the solution that you arrive at later on in this process. An example of this might be just with public policy in general, right? If we don't identify the pandemic correctly as the problem, and the problems within that pandemic, then the solutions we arrive at are not going to be the right solutions because they won't address the actual problem adequately. So the first step in developing ethical competence, the first in being ethically competent, the first step is knowing how to define the problem correctly. And so, is this a problem of conflict of interest? Is this a problem of bribery, of gift giving? What problem am I dealing with right now? Is this something else like being coerced into wrong action? Then identify your alternative courses of action and which values will be maximized and minimized in each of those courses of action. So after you have identified the problem, then you want to think through what things can I do? What options do I have? So for example, with the case of a boss telling you to do something that's not ethical, you have the option to comply with the boss. You have the option to not comply, or this is an option that no one really thought of. That's to leave the situation altogether, to just quit your job and just not comply or not deal with any of the first two options. And so it's important that when you're thinking about your options, you think through all of your options of things that you have available to you. Thirdly, you want to consider the consequences. Was there a question? I noticed that someone muted their microphone. Okay, if you have a question, you can throw it in the chat box there. The third step is to consider the possible consequences for each alternative. So in this third step, you're basically evaluating the 3 or 4 alternatives that you have noted for yourself. So, for example, if you have noted to comply with your boss's request to do something unethical, what are the consequences of that? Might that ruin your reputation in the organization? Might that improve your relationship with your boss and make them easier to work with, for example? Might that put you in a compromised position if you have to go before like a legislative committee and explain yourself, right? So consider the possible consequences for each alternative. Think through those consequences and what might arise. Now, this is a subjective activity, and sometimes none of us can predict the future, but we can at least try. And so, one way of, increasing your ethical competence is going through this step-by-step process. Finally, the fourth step is to find the right solution by comparing reasonable alternatives with accepted professional norms and justifiability for the values that will be maximized versus those minimized, right? So, you've kind of had a chance to do this with the mini cases that we've done, and the large case that we did in the last hour, is finding the right solution by comparing potential alternatives. How might one action be perceived by the public? That is an ethical norm or value, this idea of impropriety, and that might influence the action that we decide to take in each case. So we call this in the decision-making model. Spara, who's a very popular ethics scholar, calls this, I think he calls it the decision-making model. And this is a model that you can use as an inner check for more long-term decisions or decisions that are bigger decisions that you have some time to make on these decisions. This next one, actually, I think I need to stop share and then share my screen and my computer audio. So give me just a second here. Optimize screen sharing for video clip. Yeah, we'll do that too. Okay. So your inner check for at least for short-term ethics might be a little bit different. So this is a training video that I've used with my ethics students in the past. So what do you do for those in-the-moment ethical dilemmas where you don't have time to go through the 4-step decision-making process? I'm going to show this video. You should be able to hear the audio for the video okay. So hopefully you can. Here we go.
Okay, so maybe it's not strictly by the book, but nobody's going to notice. And anyhow, you didn't see anything, did you?
Difficult, isn't it? A colleague you respect suddenly displays lower standards than you thought, and what do you say? The simple answer, of course, is you say no. But life isn't simple, and the problem isn't knowing what to say. I mean, any teacher or police officer or parent could tell you that. No, the difficult part is knowing whether to say it, when to say it, and how to say it.
Hi, Paige. Hey, tomorrow at around 10 in the morning, I'm going to ask you to do something unethical. I'd like you to think very carefully about it and then give me your decision in the morning.
Well, then it would be a simple decision. But it never happens like that. It always happens just when you don't expect it.
Heather, hey Heather, look, I need your help. I forgot my meeting with Lexi this morning, and so I told her it was because our meeting ran long. You'll back me up on that, won't you? Sure. Okay, thanks. I owe you one. Bye.
So here's how to handle it. You buy thinking time. You decide how to react, and then you give your answer. I'll bet that most of the time someone agrees to do something unethical, it's because it all happened too fast. But once you've agreed, it's difficult to break out of the situation. So, buy thinking time. Learn a phrase or two that you can use whenever you're asked to do something you don't feel comfortable with. Something like, I need to think about that, give me an hour, or 10 minutes, or whatever you need. Half the time, that will be all you need to say.
Okay, so maybe it's not strictly by the book, but nobody's going to notice. And anyhow, you didn't see anything, did you?
Chris, I need to think about that. Just give me some time to consider it, okay?
You know what, Paige? You're absolutely right. I'm really sorry. I just wanted to get this done, and I shouldn't have said that. I'll call Michael right away and tell him about the problem.
And And sometimes it won't be enough.
Heather, hey Heather, look, I need your help. I forgot my meeting with Lexi this morning, and so I told her it was because our meeting ran long. You'll back me up on that, won't you?
I need to think about that, Jessica. Give me a few moments, would you?
Oh, come on. I'd do it for you. Don't be that way. Pretty, please.
But you know, if someone does that, well, they might just as well say,
Look, I'm dishonest, and I want you to be dishonest too. That's not too much to ask, is it?
so just repeat, you need time to think. So, you've bought your time, what do you do with it? Well, you think. And here are 3 useful questions to ask yourself. Number 1, if a jury saw me agree to this on videotaped evidence, would they think it was okay? Number 2, if some person I respect saw this, would he or she think it was okay? And number 3, the most important of all, if I saw someone else doing this, would I think it was okay? Now, those 3 questions will tell you all that you need to know. And if it's not okay, take a deep breath, walk in, and tell the other person.
Jessica, I'd prefer not to say something that isn't true. I'm sorry, but you're just going to have to be honest with Lexi about forgetting her meeting.
Chris, I've thought about it, and my answer is no. We'll just need to tell Michael.
You're absolutely right. I'm really sorry.
Okay, so hopefully you all heard that okay. I'm going to stop sharing here. Were you all able to see that okay, the video, and hear it? Okay, wonderful. So my question, and I love this segment here because I think it's when they do those those clips where they show what the person's actually saying, like, hey, will you just participate in this unethical behavior? I think that's really demonstrative, but it doesn't really happen that way. So my question for you all is, what fears do you have when it comes to pointing out ethical violations in the workplace?
What fears? Is that the question?
Yeah, what fears do you have when it comes to pointing out ethical violations in the workplace? Victoria noted the potential for retaliation or an uncomfortable work environment. Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, being marginalized. Michael notes, I don't really fear it, but I do dread making it harder to work in that position. Yes. Thanks, Michael. Other thoughts?
I feel like my fear is more like if I heard a supervisor say, like, let's cover something up, if I don't say something, then this is going to come back on me later. Like, this affects my future career if I'm tied to like a publication or something that there was an error in. So as much as it might be uncomfortable at the time, the further down the road fear is this will come back and bite me, and that one's bigger.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's important to differentiate between those short-term fears of being like marginalized, an uncomfortable work environment, for those long-term fears. And that's a great point, Emily. Thank you. Matt noted not being liked. Yeah, simply put, but certainly we like to be accepted by people that we work with. Don noted confrontation isn't comfortable. Definitely short-term thinking. Good. So all good answers. And, I think we all of us personally deal with these feelings, right? When we are confronted with these minor ethics violations, or even the organizational ethics violations, either one of them, we struggle with wanting to be accepted, and it's difficult to call something out. The challenge, of course, is making that the norm of our behavior. And so, it's great when we become the person that is willing to make note of when we see impropriety or when we see wrongdoing amongst our colleagues, sometimes which are our friends, and it becomes very uncomfortable to point those things out. So, as another let me bring my thanks for those comments there. As another like inner check. So you have this long-term process where you can actually go through and think about your options. In fact, sometimes I actually have my students write internal memos to themselves going through an ethical dilemma using this 4-step process. However, often our inner check has to be, buying ourselves time, as noted in this training clip, and we have to, be willing to call out ethical issues or violations in our organization. And so really there are, we kind of have an inner check for long-term, but also short-term ethics. Moving on to the more organizational side of things, we have what are called codes of ethics. And codes of ethics, maybe you've seen some of these, are meant to guide public employees. So going back to that Friedrich-Feiner debate, Friedrich would say that public employees should develop their own inner checks, whereas Feiner would say you need policies in place to guide and tell employees what they need to do. Codes of ethics since the 1970s have been tools that public organizations, including in public health, have adopted. In fact, I just recently helped the Gallatin County City County Health Department with the development of their code of ethics, and I gave them some feedback on theirs. So many of you have maybe thought about this as well. So codes of ethics are statements that define the ethical expectations for public employees within the context of workplace norms. They offer guidance by sensitizing decision makers to the importance of ethical decision making, defining that bottom line of what's acceptable behavior and not acceptable behavior, and setting the tone for expectations. So, I won't necessarily have you all raise your hands. Let's see, let me stop share here so I can see you all. But I want you to think about, does your organization have a code of ethics? And maybe you don't know. So that's something that after this training, you should certainly go and find out. If you don't know, that's fine. We're going to talk a little bit about, or if you know that your organization doesn't have one, we'll talk about that. So if they do, hopefully, but if they don't, there are some codes of ethics that can guide your decision making. We have the APSA Code of Ethics, the American Society for Public Administration. I included this as one of the resources, so you can go and look at this one. This Code of Ethics has been modified over the years, but has been in place as a code of ethics for public administrators and all levels of government. This one's more applicable to your role as a public health administrator. The Principles of Ethical Practice, Public Health. This comes from the PHLS. This is their code of ethics. I've also included this as an attachment, so I encourage you to go and read through these principles and see how they apply to you. There's also the Code of Ethics for nurses. So if any of you are nurses, the Code of Ethical Conduct from the National Association for Education of Young Children, that also is a common one used by public health administrators. So I encourage you to look at those codes of ethics and also find if your organization has one or not. It is my assumption, based upon my research, that many of you, your organization does not, in fact, have one. And as such, you can play the role of instigating that in your organizations. So just a couple other things to note. Codes of ethics may only stress a simple understanding of one's relationship to the law. And so that's important to note. I have read over several codes of ethics that are very simplistic. What's legal, though, may not be ethical, and what's ethical may not always be legal. So a good example of this is, lying to your boss to get the day off of work. That is certainly legal, but it's definitely not ethical, right? So that's why we need to differentiate between kind of low road ethics versus high road ethics. And, I've noted, just in the research that I've done on codes of ethics, I'm currently doing a research project with a TA of mine where we're looking at codes of ethics all over the state of Montana. And that is that at least in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, a lot of ethics codes focused on your low road ethics, like conflict of interest, whistleblowing, and didn't really note more of those high road ethical principles, like seeking the public interest, seeking out professional development opportunities. And so I'm gonna differentiate these for you right now. I have a couple of slides on this. Let's see here, give me a second. So this differentiation comes from a scholar in ethics known as Blake. And in their article, they talk about what are called the terms low road ethics. So these are things like conflicts of interest, whistleblowing, public disclosure. So low road ethics are usually dealing with kind of that narrow interpretation of duty, right? That your actions are constrained. So you shouldn't disclose this information to the public, for example, or you should avoid conflicts of interest in these areas. And a lot of codes of ethics, at least initially, and even some today, only focus on these lower road ethics kind of issues, and don't really focus on the high road ethical principles, like loyalty to organizational mission, right? That you should be loyal, or seek to manifest the organizational mission. And if you're not committed to the organizational mission, it might be more ethical to actually leave the organization and go somewhere else, so that you can, in fact, operate honestly within that position. Another one is deep relationship to upholding the law, in terms of being committed to the rule of law in your work, being responsible and accountable to the public, having a commitment to public service, and being having a sense of devotion to the work that you're doing, being responsive to the public, acting quickly and properly in the execution of your duties. High road ethics would also say that you should seek out new knowledge and skills. It's one thing to avoid conflicts of interest, but it's another thing to in your position not just remain stagnant, but strive to increase in your skills and abilities, or seek professional development opportunities, the achievement of your potential. That is a higher road ethic, right? That is something that's more of a broad definition of your duty. And then finally, supporting citizenship in the political process is another example of a high road ethic. Additionally, when you look at codes of ethics, you'll notice that they often include at least one or two of these types of statements or categories. These are called don't statements, responsibility statements, virtues, or personal value statements and aspirations. Don't statements are usually things that say, employees are restricted from doing these actions, or sometimes they'll literally say, do not disclose confidential information to the public. So don't statements are present in most codes of ethics. Additionally, responsibility statements are often present. Public administrators have a responsibility to uphold the public trust, as an example of a responsibility statement. Or public administrators have a responsibility to treat citizens with fairness, as an example of a responsibility statement. A virtue statement is one in which a code of ethics says something to the fact that public administrators should be, not just do do honest actions in their work, but that they should be honest people altogether, and that they should seek to become a person with integrity, or a person that is committed. And finally, aspirations are basically, again, have to do with outcomes. And so, high road ethics and this has to do with high road ethics, but sometimes codes of ethics will have statements like, in order to ensure justice and equality for all, public administrators should operate in this fashion. So the code of ethics will actually say, here is the outcomes of ethical behavior that we've noted. So comprehensive codes will have all four of these categories. But ethics codes don't necessarily have to be long 6-page documents, which I have seen some like that, in order to encompass, these 4 categories or have examples of high and low road ethics. So we're going to apply some of this knowledge that you now have about codes of ethics. I'm going to have you look at, for about, we'll say 10 minutes or so, 2 codes of ethics that I sent to you. Let me unshare my screen here. Give me just a second. So I sent you 2 documents for the 4th hour, 2 different codes of ethics. What I want you to do is, as a group, it would be great if you had somebody just read the codes of ethics out loud, and then just have in your discussion make note of examples of low road ethics and high road ethics that you've noticed, and also make note of don't statements, aspirations, or virtues that you've noticed come up in these codes of ethics. And so this is a great opportunity for you to think about, what is a more effective code of ethics? What makes an effective code of ethics? So that you can help your organizations with this. Thanks, Don. Yeah, appreciate you joining us for our webinar today. So Emily's going to split you into groups, and you'll have about, let's see, did I say 10 minutes? Yeah, let's do about 10 minutes or so, and get as far as you can, and then we'll come back together as a class and have a discussion. Okay, good. All right, so let's start with group number 1. I think we started with 2 last time. Let's see, let's come back to Matt. So Matt, what are some observations that your group made about these codes of ethics, these 2 codes of ethics here?
It seemed like the Lewis and Clark one was mostly low road, but also did have some high road stuff in there. And the Montana one was mostly high road, but also had some low road stuff in there. And
Right.
I think it's often something about those names. It makes it sound like high road is good and low road is bad. But I kind of think it's important to have both in there because, yeah, it's good to strive for great things and a culture of what we want to be like. But also, I think in any group, there's going to be big enough where like some people in there aren't gonna necessarily have the same idea of what that means or necessarily adhere to that. And I think it is also good to have some baseline requirements, just to make sure we at least hit a standard of like legality and basic respect.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment as well. Going back to the Friedrich Feiner debate, there's a balance there. The low road ethics kind of focus on those legalities, kind of those like constraints, or also thinking about it from the duty perspective, like narrowly, we need to constrain the actions of our employees in these ways. And so there's, certainly a need for low road ethics in ethics codes. To just remind people that your actions are constrained in this way, but at the same time, high road ethics are also important. Anything else to add that from your group members that you may have noticed from Victoria or Terry, Ashley?
If you rely simply on the low road permissive, prohibited activities, then you miss the opportunity for people to make decisions that aren't covered, that are wise decisions and that support the mission of the organization, simply because they're not enumerated in the document.
Right.
The high road document, the high road process allows for some of those. I think you can capture better ethics using the high road methodology, or capture additional ethical behavior using the high road methodology.
Yeah, agreed. And if you look at ethics codes, in terms of over time, in the 80s and 90s, ethics codes tend to focus on those low road ethics. But as we transition in public health specifically, how we perceive ethics has evolved over time, and what is seen as ethical behavior is a lot more high road ethic focused than it used to be. Group 2, anything that you discussed in your group that you can add in terms of your observations about these ethics codes? Michael, go ahead.
Just kind of what you just started touching on there, Adam, was something we had discussed too, was that the 2 documents, how much time was in between them in their creation, in that even though they have dates on them, doesn't necessarily mean they were amended, just recertified over time. And if there was more of an emphasis on at one area of time on one high or low road ethical standard or another, and then also that something like the Lewis and Clark County Code was more more broad and overreaching to encompass a lot more people and a lot more diverse job fields, whereas the school code is much more focused on just students and staff, faculty, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, sometimes ethics codes tend to, I mean, again, they are written in the context of those workplace norms, and so it's specific to the job. So I appreciate you pointing that out, Mike. Yeah, I mean, when I helped the Gallatin County, City County Health Department come, with theirs really, all it really addressed was gift giving. And so one of the suggestions I made was, well, maybe like you should address other like potential ethical issues that your employees might face beyond just gift giving, right? So a lot of their employees are doing home visits. And so thinking about like what other issues or dilemmas might our employees face, and then constructing your code in a way that is specific and relevant to those ethical dilemmas. Good. Other thoughts that you have as you look through these codes of ethics? Do you think that one was maybe more effective than another one in terms of its reach? I definitely think you have one looks at the professional educators versus the other one certainly highlights certain aspects of ethics in terms of aspirations that I noticed in that one. There's a lot, it's very aspirational, and it focuses on, it has a lot of responsibility statements in each one of those sections. Good. Well, so codes of ethics are one tool, right? So, in talking about our final section here, you have inner checks, right? You can go through the decision-making model. You can buy yourself time in these in ethical dilemmas that you're faced with. But at the same time, organizationally, you can create a culture of ethics in your organization by not only teaching others about these inner checks, but also thinking about how you personally can contribute to either the creation of a code of ethics in your organization or the redevelopment of one. Chances are, if you do have one, it could probably use some improvements. Perhaps it doesn't focus on high road ethics enough. Perhaps it has too many don't statements and doesn't focus on aspirations or the responsibilities of those in your organization. So I encourage each of you to look up your code of ethics after this training. And if you notice that there is none, or there's one, but it's not very comprehensive, that you contribute to the culture of ethics in your organization by improving it. Just a few final thoughts as we end our training that I want to share with you. Let me bring up this slide here. Okay, so just a few things. Ethical decision-making starts with you, okay? So even if others are making poor decisions in your organization, it's up to you, now that you've received this training, to go out and share with others. Consider, what are my duties as an employee of my organization? What virtues should I have? What principles should I operate from? What are considered the best outcomes for my work in terms of economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and equity, and being mindful about those outcomes? Locate your organization's code of ethics, read it, commit to using it, but also take charge in improving it and training other employees on it. Take charge in its creation, as I mentioned, if you don't notice one. Make ethics a part of department meetings, okay? This is one thing that I think is really important that you take with you, that you should include in your notes. Invite an employee to take 5 minutes to discuss one provision in the ethics code with every department meeting that you have. So if you have like, you know, bi-weekly department meetings or monthly department meetings, always make ethics a part of the conversation. Ethics shouldn't be a conversation that you're having when you notice problems. You should preemptively be discussing ethics before problems even arise, so that employees already have the guidance that they need to act in proper ways. Promote ethical decision-making in your organization by sharing the components of the ethics triangle with others. And you know, if you are interested in additional training, I do have a training B that I'm developing. This is my email. So if you have any questions or want me to take a look at your organizational code of ethics, you can send me an email, adam.brewer@umontana.edu. I'd be more than happy to take a look at a code of ethics that you're developing, or to answer any questions that you have if you're facing a situation, to talk with you. Questions about the University of Montana's MPA program or our combined Master of Public Administration, Master of Public Health program, or any of our graduate certificate programs, you can send those questions to Sarah Rinfrey, our department chair at umontana.edu, and she'd be more than happy to answer those questions. And that does it. So I'm going to turn the time back over to Emily. And thanks everyone for your engagement today. It's been just a pleasure to get to know you and interact with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. In the chat box, I've put a link to our survey or evaluation. Please take a second to fill that out. It's really quick. We certainly use that information. We give it back to our instructor, and it also helps us host useful and awesome trainings. So please take a second for that.
Yeah, please, please.
And thank you so much for coming, you guys. Check the website for more training opportunities.